So good morning. Next, we are going to see about that is Unit 2, that is cloud computing enabling technologies. So in first unit, we have seen about the introduction to cloud computing, what are the services and what are the deployment models and what are the principles we have taken from parallel computing and distributed computing. Next, what are the cloud characteristics here. In second unit, what are the techniques for there in cloud computing to boom our cloud computing, that is to enable our cloud computing. What are the techniques behind in cloud computing? The first, SOA architecture. So we have one in computer science in UG degree, we have one subject that is called SOA architecture. SOA subject is there. Here we are not going to discuss about that entire subject. We have one principle or one architecture in cloud computing. Sorry. Service oriented architecture is essentially a collection of services. So these services communicate with each other in cloud computing. The communications can involve either simple data passing or it could involve two or more services coordinating some activity. Some means of connecting services to each other is needed. So example in cloud computing, if you are going to access a service, that service should be processed by someone, right? So in backend, we need some, if I am the user in cloud computing, if I am posting some data, so if I want to request some data, that data has to be processed or serviced by one architecture, and that service should get input from the user, and that input must be processed, and I should get particular service output from the database in, right? So we need some centralized architecture or intermediator or interface between the user and that end part. So these services will communicate with each other in cloud computing. This communication can involve either in simple data passing or it could involve two or more services coordinating some activity, right? Some means of connecting services to each other is needed. So we'll see as service oriented architecture is a style or software design where services are provided to other components by application components through a communication protocol over network. So example, very simply, I have to say what is the use of SOA architecture is. So example, if you are going to access any data in your mobile application, if your mobile application is developed in Java programming, imagine that the same Java programming will not be used at server side. If client using some other application in some other language, that same application will not be designed by same language in server side. At server side can be used in any type of languages. They can in server side, in server implementation, they use different type of programming languages, but in client side it can be used some other programming languages, but the interface is common. If I'm the user, I'm going to submit some data through that application, but it is developed in Java programming. But server side, it is developed in some other programming languages. How the data is communicated between the client and server in cloud computing? So we need some architecture behind that to get inputs from the cloud users, and it has to be processed, and it has to be converted into the common format, and it has to be send that corresponding output from the servers, and they have to give that response to the cloud. So we need some centralized architecture in cloud computing. So that is one of the architectures called service oriented architecture. It gets services from the user, and it is processed and converted in a common platform, and that process to the server side, and it will display the corresponding services and outputs to the user side. So these principles are independent of vendors and other technologies. In service oriented architecture, a number of services communicate with each other in one or two ways. through passing data or through two or more services coordinating an activity. What is services? If a services, if a service architecture is to be effective, we need a clear understanding on terms services. A service is a function that is well defined, self-contained, and does not depend upon the text or state of other service. Connections, the sense, the technology of web services, the most likely connection technology of service-oriented architecture. The following figure illustrates a base service-oriented architecture. So from this, we can understand in simple what the SO architecture does in cloud computing. So service providers. So we know who are the service providers in cloud computing and service consumers. So major cloud service providers that is Google, Amazon, and IBM. They are the biggest example of service providers. They are providing their services to the users. That service who request that service, they are called service consumers, right? So in between is that we are giving as a consumer, we are giving some request to the service provider. I need this type of service from your end. That will be processed and service provider will provide that service as a response to the service consumer. It shows a service consumer at the right sending a service request message to a service provider at the left. That service provider returns a response message to the service consumers. The request and the subsequent response connections are defined in some way that is understandable to both service consumers and service providers. The third point is very important. The request and subsequent response connections are defined in some way that is understandable. That common format should be understandable to both consumers and service providers. So who does that understandable format? So your SY architecture will do that in cloud computing. So if user doing some application in Java programming, that Java programming will be converted to a common format, and that common format will be sent to the service, that is server side. That server will process the data, will give response as a service to the service consumer. So all the activities will be taken care by this centralized access, that is called service oriented architecture. So this service oriented architecture is most important in cloud computing. Web services which are built as per the SOA architecture or more independent architecture. Without the centralized access, we cannot process our data from consumers to the service providers. But because in real world, there are so many programming languages which has been used, right? So all the persons will not use the same programming language. So somebody use Java, somebody use JSP, .NET, Python, C programming, PHP. We have so many programmings in our computer science. So these web services themselves can exchange data with each other, and because of understanding principles of which they are created, they don't need any sort of human interactions and don't need any code modifications. So these web services will convert into a common format. For converting these, for exchanging this data, we don't need of any human interactions and code modifications in between in our architecture. So all the activities will be taken care by your SOA architecture. That is the already I said this architecture are very important in cloud computing. This ensures that web services over internet and interact with each other. So through this, we can serve in a web from users to consumers as a service in the internet. So there are a lot of web services which is available in cloud computing, and benefits of using SOAs in cloud computing, that is language neutral interaction, component reuse, organizational agility, leveraging existing system. So our XY architecture is divided into 5 horizontal layers, which is described below. First one is consumer interface layer, second business process layer, service layer, service component layer, and operational system layer. So first one, consumer interface layer. These are the graphical user interface based on applications for end users accessing these applications. If any user want to use that application, through this layer only, the user will get or submit their data to the consume, that is a service provider side. So second is business process layer. These are the business use cases in terms of application. Third one is service layers. These are whole enterprises in service inventory. Fourth one, service component layer, are used to build the services such as functional and non-functional libraries. Sorry, functional and technical libraries. Fifth layer, that is operational system layer. It contains the data model. Service governance. So first we will discuss about the architecture. This architecture will have these 4 parts: business process, quality of service, description, and messaging. So first, in a business process execution language of web service. So first layer is your this web service hyphen business process execution language service, that layer. And what type of quality we are having in SOA architecture is reliability, transaction management, and management. That is last description is WSDL, that is web service description format. That, as I said before, all these services will get accepted by your service oriented architecture and will be converted into common format. As I said before, that common format will be in format of WS description language, that is web service description language. These languages will convert it as a common format, and that input will be given to your server side, and server will process all this data and send back our data to the cloud consumers from server end. So for that, we are going to use that messaging protocol, that is SOAP, simple object access protocol, and that data format will be XML format, that is extensible markup language format. So these are the important 4 layers in cloud computing, that is business process, quality of service layer, and description and messaging. So this is the common architecture protocol. And what are the elements we have in SOA architecture? So we have discussed about what is SOA and what does the principles, what does SOA does in our cloud computing, what are the layers and their architecture diagram. Here elements, what are the elements which present inside your architecture, that is service oriented architecture. First, application front end, service repository, and service bus service. And here it is divided into services, divided into 3 categories: contract, implementation, and interface. And this implementation is divided into 2 parts, that is business logic and data part. This is the next diagram pattern for SOA architecture. It is platform, people, process, and practice. So which is the back end of your service oriented architecture? First is people important, process, platform, and practice. Empower business makers, they are the people. Process, that is aligned with IT business operations, increase operational efficiency, and employee best practice methodology. So we have different types of architectures in cloud computing. REST is also one of the architecture. In second unit, we are going to discuss about the different types of architectures which is available in cloud computing for enabling cloud computing. Next is address systems and systems. It is also one of the architecture style that defines a certain set of constraints to be used for creating web services. So in second unit, we have different types of architectures. So we are going to see SYA REST architecture, that is publish and subscriber model, and the virtualization. We are going to see virtualization is the backbone of your cloud computing. Without virtualization, there is no cloud computing. So there are different types of services and different types of architectures in cloud computing. In second unit, REST is one of the architecture. How this, what is web service, types of web service advantages, architecture and their characteristics. What is web service? So web service is a standardized medium to propagate communication between the client and the server applications on the World Wide Web. So web service is the biggest. Without, for this only we are going for cloud computing. So as I said before, it is a service which has to be provided on the internet for the better understanding or usability of your cloud users. So web service is a software model which is designed to perform a certain set of tasks. So web service is a service offered by server running on a computer device, listening for computers to at a particular port over a network, servicing web components and creating web applications, services which serve in solving specific domain problems on the internet. So this is the overall diagram. Already, as I said before, in SOA architecture, the same diagram. Types of services, we have two types. One is SOA web services, next one is RESTful web services. So as I said before, our common format is web services description language. And we have public subscriber model. So this is pattern is example of, we have a public subscriber models. So in YouTube's, we are going to subscribe something, I will get so many notifications under that particular user, no need to search anything. So that is, publisher will access that subscriber to a common channel. So if I subscribe to a particular YouTube channel, if there is any notifications, that data will be sent as a common format to all the subscribers. Whoever subscribe that channel, there will be common notifications for that. So if there is a data published, I don't need to check all the time. There will be notifications, right? So it is one of the principle in cloud computing. Is this a messaging pattern where publishers push messages to the subscribers? Whoever subscribe that particular pattern or particular architecture or particular pattern, they will be get messages to the consumer side, right? So there are so many architecture. This is the diagram for that. So a second topic, that is a backbone of your cloud computing, is virtualization. So without virtualization, that is nothing to be happened in cloud computing, right? There are different types. This is your virtualization: hypervisor, host, OS or bootstrap, hardware. There are different types of virtualization: OS level virtualization, hypervisor based virtualization, operating system virtualization, server, hardware, operating system virtualization, storage virtualization. So virtualization is the making a virtual platform of serving server, operating system and storage devices. So this helps the user for providing multiple machines at the same time. It allows sharing a single physical instance of a resource or application to a multiple users. See, we cannot depend, for example, in a Google, there are a lot of, at a time, there are a lot of people can access Google. So for each and every people, we cannot able to allocate resources at individually. So we have to do something in advance or as an imaginary one, that is called virtualization. So virtualization what allows the helper to user by providing multiple machines at the same time. It can be allows use sharing a single physical instance. By sharing one physical instance, we can make that it's a multiple machines, and we can be able to run it so many times, and it can be able to process multiple users at the time. So cloud virtualizations also manage the workload by transforming traditional computing and make it more scalable, economical and efficient. They have different types, we'll see.